Ooh, this reminds me of one thing. As I was doing the apprenticeship in Switzerland, our teachers would get mad if you used a Sharpie. I think I'm going to use a Sharpie on purpose this time. This is our boat. I have made a template. It is a very intricate one. This is the chain locker axis from the V-berth.
This episode is all about nerding out over fiberglass. Aladino is a self-described liquid snot expert, and he's about to put his skills to the test in our V-berth. Come join in as we ponder the question, can fiberglass ever be as satisfying as wood?
Wow, Dini, this looks so good.
Welcome back. New week, new episode.
Of course, every Friday, folks. Last week's episode focused on a bunch of activities, starting with the deck beams above and then finishing off with some plans for the anchor locker. And in this episode, we're starting again in the interior of the boat. We're doing something exciting that we haven't done yet in this refit series.
Totally. We're starting to get into fiberglassing again. Maya will be helping. It's always very precious to have a helper. One guy is usually spreading and rolling and applying resin, and somebody's mixing epoxy, everything that is needed from down below, so you're not running up and down.
But before we get into the main event, let's first discuss and perhaps review for some of you why we're doing this.
Our boat has a solid fiberglass hull with balsa insulation, which is very different from a balsa cord hull. Back in the 80s, Cape George used to give owners the option to insulate the hull with balsa wood. Whether owners chose this option or not, the hull was built exactly the same, so the balsa does not play any necessary structural role. In fact, below the waterline, there's 1 1/4 inches of solid fiberglass. Yes, you heard me right, 1 1/4 inches of solid fiberglass. We've drilled through it, it's true. But back to the balsa insulation. With the modern materials of today, balsa definitely isn't the first choice for insulation, but it's also definitely better than nothing. And not only does it keep some heat in, but it also helps to soften the noise of waves on the hull, so it doesn't sound like you're living in a tin can. So we wanted to keep the balsa, but we didn't like the way it was fiberglassed in place. A thick matte cloth was used, and the thick weave combined with a thin layer of resin allowed water to penetrate and start molding the balsa. We also didn't like the rough surface texture on the inside of the hull. We wanted a smooth surface that looks good underneath some white paint and is easy to keep clean. So a while ago I ripped the matte fiberglass cloth off, and now we're going to put some better stuff in its place.
But before fiberglassing, there's an awful lot of prep work involved, most of which has already been done.
It's mostly a mix of sanding and using a bit of putty and fairing. I'm always minimal on the putty side because it doesn't add any properties, it doesn't have any structural component or any strength really. There is some better ones, but the less the better. Another one you want to look out for is rounding over edges. Fiberglass doesn't really curve over much of an edge, and also the fiberglass would be weakened. Like this is nothing structural, but just so that it's mentioned. Those were the two initial steps. And after that, removing dust, of course, vacuuming, and the step that I have ahead of me right now is degreasing the surface, and that is done with acetone. Let the acetone evaporate, so don't start right away. So I'm wiping it down right now. So then we move down, do some preparatory steps on the table down below, and we'll let this evaporate. Because otherwise you could encapsulate and trap part of the acetone, and it can cause bubbles, for example. It cannot cure, a lot of headache. Here's the fiberglass that I prepared yesterday evening. So we have biaxial cloth here, and it is stitched instead of woven, and from that we hope to get the benefit of having a smoother surface. So for now, let's start with the chain locker first, and then I move backwards. So let's do chain locker port side first.
The night before, Aladino had already gone ahead and cut all these fiberglass pieces to size.
Yeah, I didn't know if I was proceeding today with fiberglassing, so I just handle fiberglass with great care. I wrap it up in plastic for it not to get too humid, for not touching it all the time with greasy fingers. Yeah.
We chose a biaxial fiberglass cloth, with a nice tight weave on one side and a sacrificial chop strand layer on the other. The idea is that the chop strand layer can handle a bit of sanding without affecting the structure on the woven side.
So the first step will be epoxy with a little bit of 407 filler to make a bit of a putty, because I still have a few tiny voids and cracks. I will spread that over the areas before I add the fiberglass.
Now it was go time. As soon as the epoxy gets mixed, the clock starts ticking. We used a slow hardener to give us as much time as possible, mixed into a thick paste to apply onto the boat directly.
So as you can see, I'm trying to add minimal filler. I put it on and then I try to scrape everything off again, but yet there's many tiny voids that are being filled. And also because this is not as structural, otherwise I would try to have an even flatter surface in the beginning and not need to use filler at all.
Meanwhile, down below, I started by mixing some more epoxy without any fillers and began to wet out the fiberglass. The fiberglass needs to be completely saturated with resin, but too much resin just adds excessive weight without any structural advantage. So we made sure the cloth was totally saturated and then scraped off any excess.
Now I'm wetting out the surface, so the fiberglass will just stick to it like vacuum. So usually this is done before using the filler, you do wet it out, but I'm doing the opposite. Just because the filler usually sags away, of course, from the liquid, if you do it the other way around. 3 more pumps just to have on standby, but I go grab the cloth also.
Okay. Is it go time?
Go time.
Alright.
The only difficult thing is now I have to roll it up the opposite way, and some top strands might stay stuck. No, you need help. Can you get that off?
This was a sticky process. The goal was to get the fiberglass laying perfectly flat with no air bubbles or voids beneath. At first, Aladino just used his hands to smooth it all out and get it in position. He then used a metal roller to remove any voids or bubbles, and meanwhile down below I wetted out the second sheet of fiberglass.
Oh, that looks really good.
Totally.
No voids. Awesome.
I'm applying a good amount of pressure here.
Lots of pressure?
Huh?
Lots of pressure on the roller?
Yeah, I'm applying quite a bit of pressure. And every time when you roll, you have to look up here, because if you roll down, you might create bubbles here. So here instead I push up.
Okay.
To have the fiberglass move up, because by its moving down it creates a void. And on the other side it's a balance. If you pull it up, you might create something in this hollow here. So yeah, keep an eye on the whole thing. I'm pretty pleased, it looks good. There is one spot here which is tricky. You saw I had to massage the cloth a lot, and that is because the bow is curved. The cloth kind of warps, so I had to massage those wrinkles out. But I still have a bit of a void here. So if I cannot get rid of it, then instead of a void, I will use a syringe and I will inject a bit of resin, not to have a void right there. Here it's a pretty harsh curve, so it doesn't want to stick to it, so I do help it out every now and then as it becomes tacky with a little bit of resin, wet it out and try to keep it in place.
So now we've put the 2 first sheets of fiberglass on, but we are going to continue and add a few more sheets. I'm not going to film these ones because I want to get them done a bit quicker this time, but we will show you the end result in just a moment.
Last one!
What a teamwork!
What a teamwork indeed.
Very, 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 very happy with how it's going. Amazing teamwork for first time laying fiberglass in a while. This is going very professionally.
Yay!
Oh, could you do me a favor and move the light over to this corner, please?
Oh, yeah. Wow, Deanie, this looks so good.
Not quite done yet.
And you were saying how much you like this fiberglass.
Yeah, I'm very happy with the choice I made.
And so why are you happy about it specifically?
How you can work it, how it doesn't, it's not torn apart easily, and it's 20 ounces is pretty substantial. This is quite structural. It's nice to have the fibers in 2 orientations. The chop strand stays on very well. Only downside is you have to be careful with all the strings that it's sewn with. If you get a hold of these, of course you tear it every time. But that's just something you have to know. You have to massage them and push them in place. And the other thing is it takes a while to wet out because it is so thick. But look at this. This is creating a wall. It's very flat and smooth. It's exactly what we wanted.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Not quite, mister.
Oh, damn, you learn too fast.
Working with fiberglass and resins is definitely less glamorous or elegant than working with a gorgeous piece of wood, but the results felt just as satisfying in a way. Having a smooth, clean, and brightly painted interior goes a long way. It's not only an aesthetic benefit, but it's also a health benefit. Mold is a constant battle on boats, and a surface that you can see and clean easily is really important. That's one of the biggest reasons why we were so eager to take this step up in the V-berth, especially since that's where we'll sleep every night.
Soon it's time for the roller, but still, the roller does not replace the fingers, so I prefer massaging it into place first. If I step away, you can see the difference of when it's rolled and proper without air, and instead here it's still not rolled. are done.
Yay!
But as done means on a boat, yeah, I might explain what we have to continue with. Here, only one layer of fiberglass is enough. This is all we're gonna do. But in the chain locker, we're gonna add another layer, but that will be after the partition is in. I wanted to get to this stage, so now I can get the partition in and tab it in, and here we're done. Just as a note, if I were to leave this as it is, if you want to do less prep work and get the finish on it right away, you can see that here it's still tacky, but it's not as flexible anymore. So this would be the right stage here to either mix some 407 again and do a putty, and you can cover it up perfectly and make it a perfectly flat surface. You can blend in these edges, and then it would be another step done before it cures and you have to start over with the prep. I wish we would be there and I could do this right now, but as I said, we have more things to fiberglass, and I want to add another layer, but that will be for later. Just thought I might add that.
Alright.
But for now, cold shower and beer.
Yay!
Let's get out of here.
The next day, there was more fiberglassing to do. We wanted to add a layer of fiberglass to the forward side of the chain locker bulkhead.
I have made a template. It is a very intricate one. And what I will do now is lay it on the fiberglass and trace it out. So what you see here is the bulkhead. This is the chain locker axis from the V-berth, and that's pretty much it. As I was doing the apprenticeship in Switzerland, our teachers would get mad, and you would get a pretty bad grade if you used a Sharpie to trace out the fiberglass required. Even though it does get gel coated or painted, yeah, that's how picky they were. And I think I'm going to use a Sharpie on purpose this time. This is our boat, and I can do whatever I want. No. Of course, it is nice to learn it that way, but I know it is not compromising it, and it's going to be painted over, so it is a lot easier and quicker. And maybe I could fill you guys in though on how we would mark fiberglass to be able to cut accurately. So when we use chop strand mat, we place the template on top of the chop strand mat and then just start tearing it with our hands, holding the template firm against it, of course. So yeah, it's without marking it. And we do the ripping technique because it tapers the edges of the chop strand mat, and you can put on however many layers you want, and it's going to be one smooth, continuous surface. Instead, if you're using something that is woven, which is not using a binder like chop strand mat, then you can pinch two continuous fibers that run from one side to the other, and you pull those out, and then it's really nicely visible where you have to cut. Of course, that only works for squares. And the other one, if it has to be a different cut, a curvature or whatever, then it is using something finer than a Sharpie, because Sharpie soaks in a tiny bit. So you're either using a ruler or a fine Sharpie, and then you trace it out outside of where you're cutting your fiberglass so that you don't have any pencil marks in there. All right, enough rambling. Let's cut this out.
The V-berth and the chain locker bulkhead are now stronger and more waterproof than they were at the beginning of this episode. This felt very satisfying, and because it had gone so well, it made us look forward to continuing the process with the upper part of the V-berth, and we'll get to that soon. But in the meantime, we'll leave you here this week. Thank you so much to all of you for watching. If you enjoyed the episode, it would be super helpful if you gave us a thumbs up, or if you left a comment and also subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. Big thank you to our patrons for making these episodes possible every single week. If you're interested in what's happening in real time, you can head over to Patreon, and for as little as $2 a month, you can get access to weekly real-time updates only available to patrons. And an extra big thanks to these folks who always go the extra mile to make sure that Magic Carpet keeps being produced. We'll see you all in the next episode.